Okay, this is the therapeutic gardener, and I am going to show you how I feed my bin today. So, as you can see, I have it covered with burlap, and I'll show you the top in a minute because that was a process in the making. This bin is actually 55 days old, and this is my first time keeping a worm bin and raising worms, so to speak. I'm not so much raising worms as I am growing dirt, growing compost, vermicompost for my garden. So I am the therapeutic gardener. And I call myself the therapeutic gardener, one, because it's gardening, and even keeping this worm bin is very therapeutic for me. The other reason is I am a certified licensed therapist. And so I encourage people to find something they enjoy to use as part of their self-care routine, something that will help them manage stress, anxiety, depression. It can help with any mood disorder. It's something when you are taking care of life, and it doesn't matter if it's a pet, a plant, or worms in this case. So let me gear up and put my gloves on. Sometimes I see on other people's YouTube channels, people ask, why do you wear gloves? I primarily wear gloves to keep my nails clean and to keep my nails healthy, because they break and get brittle from being in dirt and moisture all the time. So that's why I wear gloves. As far as I know, your bare hands will do nothing to harm the worms, because sometimes I forget to put on gloves, and I will work with my bare hands. The other reason I wear gloves, and you might find this somewhat strange for somebody who wants to keep a worm in, is that I don't like the feel of the worms. They're wiggly, and some people say they're not slimy, but they're slimy to me. It's a texture I don't necessarily want on my skin. And I happen to be very sensitive, to things on my skin. I've had a skin sensitivity since I was a child, so I don't like weird feelings on my skin. That being said, if you look at this bin, this is black gold. It's what we call black gold. And this is a 30-gallon bin. And I don't know if you can see that fill line, but the fill line is actually about 12 inches from this line down. That's about 12 inches deep. This bin right now is about at the 3-inch mark. Last time I checked, it was exactly at 3 inches, and that was a few days ago. So I don't think it's moved since then, but it's at 3 inches. I started it literally from nothing. And people do their worm bins differently. I've learned a lot from watching different YouTubers. But what I do is I don't necessarily bury the food. I layer the food. And I'm okay with my bins slowly filling up. You'll see people fill their bins up with bedding to the top, and then the worms will work the bedding and the food scraps down, and eventually it'll come down to a low level, and then it fill it back up again. That's not typically how I work. How I work is I just add a layer at a time, and as they work through that layer, it will slowly build. Instead of building it high and letting it work down to a low level, I just kind of build one layer at a time, and I'm okay with it being slow. Now, this is my first time doing this, but I estimate, almost to the 2-month part I did, this bin has accumulated to 3 inches of castings. Not pure castings yet, because I'm still feeding it, but approximately 3 inches of castings mixed in with bedding and food. So I figure in 6 months, approximately 6 months, I should be up to this fill line, and that's when I will harvest the bin. And so we're now in October. We're looking at February for that to happen. So I'll keep you posted and see if I'm correct with my calculations. So right now, I have my food, and you'll see how I layer it. So What you see in here now, again, is castings, beddings. These are little crab apples out of the tree in my yard. They take forever to break down. And that's actually, those crab apples are mixed into my bedding. So whenever I add new bedding, there's a new batch of crab apples that are going to be added to that. I don't really count that as food, at least not immediately accessible food for the worms. So as I lay this out, I'll kind of let you know what's in here. And I'll show you exactly. I don't put it in one spot. I do spread it out all over because I like the worms to kind of stay spread out. I'm not sure. I see a lot of people burying it, or they put it in one spot and mark the spot. I feel like the worms, are only going to work in that spot. And I don't understand the purpose of that. So I like my worms to work the whole bin all the time, 24/7. So I like the worms to be spread out. And just so you know, I started with 500 worms. I've already seen lots of cocoons, lots of babies. Now there's juveniles in here over the 60-day period. And I feel like my method is working really well. It's a really healthy bin. It's not watery. If I lift up, and I'm going to show you, I want to lift up right here. See, look at the worms. And this bedding, this castings is not wet. There's no water in the bottom of this bin, but yet it is nice and moist and nice and black. And that's exactly how I want my food in. So let me tell you what's in here. This is actually a pear. I can tell that that's a pear that's already breaking its way down. And so, I freeze my food because it accumulates so fast. It accumulates faster than what I can feed it to the worms. So I freeze it as I get it, and then I thaw it. Some people put it in frozen, but even in the summertime, I don't put it in frozen. I thaw it so that I kind of time it, the thawing, like the day before. If I know I'm going to feed the next day, I'll thaw it the day before. And that way it's already in the position of being broken down. And I actually allow it to break down a little before I freeze it, because as I gather it, I just kind of keep it in a house compost bin and it starts to break down then. So back to what's in here. That's a tomato. I showed you a pear. These are orange peels. Here's some bread. Here's, let's see, what is this exactly? That looks like a piece of a sweet potato, possibly. And yes, these are sweet potato skins. What else? Oh, this is a piece of a banana. And I do rough chop everything. I don't put big whole pieces of things in here. Like that's a big piece of onion peel. Sometimes I might put a whole tomato in here. This one looks like a whole tomato, but it's so already at the point of decomposing that that'll be fine. The same thing with this tomato. Sometimes I do put whole pieces in here because I'd like to see what the worms will do with it. But for the most part, I do what I call a rough chop. If it's not something like skins that's already shedded or cut up, I'll rough chop it. And I just do that as I go. Like before I put it in the in-house compost bin, I'll chop it before I even put it in there. That way it's going to start breaking down before I even put it in the bin. And as you can see, I just spread everything out as evenly as I possibly can, making sure that pretty much every inch of this top surface is covered with food. But that's not it. So initially I was trying to feed once a week, and I realized that was a little bit too much feeding to the worms, because worms, I started seeing a lot of springtails and an abundance of springtails, which means they populated more to help the worms eat the food. And so I don't want that many springtails in there. I slowed down on the feeding. So instead of every 7 days, I've lessened the amount of food, plus I've extended the days to this now. I should have fed on Sunday. Today is Tuesday, so it's about 9 days. So I'm going between 9 and 10 days for the last few weeks of feeding this bin. And what I look for is I look to see how much of the bedding is gone. Not whether or not the food is gone, but how much of the bedding is gone. I would like at least half, 50% to 75% of the bedding, the new bedding, because you'll see I'm going to put new bedding on this, to see if that's gone before the next feeding. So I see bugs flying around. I'm just going to temporarily cover this up while I get some of the other things, because what the next layer that goes on that is what goes on here next is the coffee grounds, and this helps for grit. It also helps keep the odor down. It also adds nutrients that my garden will need. So I add in, right after I put the kitchen scraps on, I add my coffee grounds. And my husband and I both drink a lot of coffee. I use a Keurig, but I don't take time to break open those little pods. So my husband likes his coffee fresh brewed from beans. So every morning he grinds the beans, well, the machine grinds the beans, and then he brews his coffee. So that's where these grounds come from, is literally all my husband and the coffee that he drinks. He drinks about 2 to 3 cups a day, so that's about how many coffee grounds I have in here per day, 2 to 3 cups. And I put a layer on, not too heavy, I don't want too much, because all of this is food. And at the end of the day, everything I put on here counts as food. And so that's probably one reason why they were getting overfed, because I was just giving them too much of everything combined, not too much of the kitchen scraps. But they have grown, my worms have populated. So I do have to give them a little more, but I realize I don't have to stick to a 7-day schedule, you know. I can extend that 7 days out a little further, which is what I'm doing. And to me, the bin looks awesome. I mean, you can judge for yourself, but to me, it looks awesome. So those are my coffee grounds. And after I put on the coffee grounds is when I add bedding. So I do have bedding already made up. Whenever I get low on my bedding, I will make some more. This is the second time since I've had this bin that I've had to make bedding. So the first batch I ran out on, this is the second time I made it. Now I will say the very first week I did not have this type of bedding. I learned to make this bedding from a guy on YouTube. Now he adds like his coffee grounds and everything to the bedding. I don't add my coffee grounds to the bedding, and he adds I think the coffee grounds and something else to the bedding, but I kind of keep my bedding simple. So this bedding contains shredded paper, white and brown, and newspaper. And it also contains cardboard. I put some compost in there, or just some dirt from the yard, to give it those microbes that it needs. And as you can see, because I have these in my yard, I add these crab apples. I don't count them again as readily available food because they just take so long to break down. I mean, this is what it looks like when it starts to break down. It just takes so long that, you know, the worms aren't going to touch it until it's actually breaking down. So it's not worm food yet, but it will be. And making this bedding, I found, was so helpful because it also keeps those other unwanted pests down, like the gnats and fruit flies. This bedding keeps that down tremendously. So just, I don't think I mentioned everything that's in the bedding. So I also have leaves in here. As you can see, you can kind of see some of the things that's in here. I also have coconut coir. I skimped on the coconut coir this time, which is why you see this paper matted up, and I'll just break it up because I don't want it all matted like that. But I do have to order some more coconut coir, and sometimes you have to mix this up again because the coconut coir will fall to the bottom. The coconut coir and the compost will fall to the bottom. All the leaves and things stay on top. So it looks like some sections have more coconut coir than others. But I love this bedding. I think my bin has been flourishing since I've started using this bedding and putting it on it any way that I'm doing it. So this is actually the third layer. So the first layer was my kitchen scraps. The second layer was the coffee grounds. And now the third layer is this bedding. And I just want it covered. I want a light, thin layer. I don't want it thick because there was bedding already in here. And this is a form of burying the food. I mean, I don't actually dig a hole and bury it, but because I'm covering it, it is now buried. So technically I do bury the food. I know one time because it was so much bedding in here, I didn't add any bedding, and that's when those springtails got out of hand. So that's why I wait for at least 75% of the bedding to be gone before I even feed them anything at all. Because I like to give them kind of everything at one time and give them time to break it down. So again, the last time I fed this with the same exact layer you see me doing now, you see there's those gnats in there already because they're in the bedding, which is okay. I don't mind the bugs as long as they don't overtake the bin. And I think that's enough bedding, so I'm gonna stop there. And that was my third layer. So we had the kitchen scraps, the coffee grounds, and the bedding. And now what I'm gonna put on top of this is more grit. And this is what I call my worm chow, worm food, worm chow, nutrients. There is some nutrients in here, and then there's just stuff that's kind of filler and fattening, but great for grit. And so what's in my worm food is eggshells, oatmeal, and cornmeal. And I save my eggshells as we use them in the house. Save them, clean them, microwave them. I clean them, I rinse them thoroughly with water, then microwave them until they're completely dry. And once I run out of this, you know, I have some, I buy the cheapest oatmeal. I don't buy what we actually eat, because I do eat oatmeal, but this is not stuff I would eat. Not to say my worms deserve less, but just to keep expenses down, I buy the cheapest stuff for my worms, and I buy the cheapest cornmeal. And so the cornmeal is probably more like fuller. The oatmeal has nutritional value, and so does the eggshell. But they love this stuff, and I put a light coating of this on. So this is the last layer that I put on, and this is to help bring some of the worms to the top. You know, there's some worms who will stay and work on that kitchen scraps, and that's going to be the first thing that's gone, is the kitchen scraps. Actually, sometimes what I notice is the food chow is the first thing that's gone, and then the kitchen scraps, and then they work the rest of the bedding over. But this, you know, because I put the bedding on top, and I know they love the kitchen scraps, this kind of helps attract them up to the bedding so that it's almost being worked, everything is kind of being worked on simultaneously. And I'll show you this maybe a couple days in a row so that you can see what I mean and how things are kind of getting worked over. So these big leaves and things in there, before I was putting leaves in here and I was putting them in dry, and then I would wet them down. They weren't being worked over as quickly, but with the worm chow on it, they seem to do a much better job of working this bedding over in a time frame that works for me. Like, it's not such a slow process. It's still a slow process because you just have to give them time to do what they do, but it's not as slow as it was before. This is a little bit more enticing. I call this my enticer. And that's it. That's the fourth layer. First layer, kitchen scraps. Second layer, coffee grounds. Third layer, bedding. Fourth layer, worm chow. And so, you know, of course it's a little higher because of these layers, but that'll work back down. That'll work itself back down, but it'll still be higher than what it was before. And I'll keep you guys posted, and you'll be posted from now on until harvest day, just so you can see how I do what I do with my worms. I'm excited because I have taken a little bit of the castings out of here to use in the garden, because I planted some fall things and some things that are supposed to come up in the spring, and I just wanted to use those castings. So I did take a little bit of castings out from the very bottom of the bin to use and make a mixture to go around my already planted. I forgot, I'm back because I just wanted to show you how I actually cover up the bin. And so after I put on my worm chow, I cover this bin with burlap, and then I put on my top that I had to reconfigure. So initially when I started out, you can see I had holes in here. I had holes here and holes all the way around the bin. I'll show you that. See, I had holes all the way around here where you see this cloth. And then I found that bugs were getting in. Not so much that the worms were trying to get out, but you know, I'm in the garage. If you could just take a look at me being in the garage. And so in this garage, there were a lot of bugs, spiders, all different types of things getting in my bin. And I closed up the holes thinking the fabric itself would allow the worms to breathe. And what I found the next day is that the worms were trying to get out. There were like 30 worms on the top of the bin trying to get out because it got too hot. Not so much they were suffocating, but it was just too hot. So that punched holes in the fabric, and that didn't seem to be enough. So then I decided to cut out this whole big piece. I put a piece of fabric in place of what I cut out, and then I put the screen here because even with the fabric in the summertime and the garage door being closed, it still felt like warm. I would feel steam coming from the bin when I opened it. So I basically cut out a hole in the fabric, and I had to put mesh over it again to keep things out. But this actually allows it to breathe a lot better. And since then, the bin has been doing great. I mean, it was the best thing I could have done. So it took me trial and error. And then after I went through all this work, I saw other people on YouTube who basically this is how they were doing their bins. But initially, I just saw people putting the holes in, and that's how I started my bin, and that didn't work for me. So there you have it. Just wanted to show you that, and I'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye-bye. This is the Therapeutic Gardener signing off. If you like me, please hit the like button. If you want to see more, please hit the subscribe button. Thanks. Bye.